Comparable and comparator. These are the two concepts which are required when you are trying to put the bunch of object into some collection and you want to do the sorting of those objects. Okay, suppose you want to store 100 strings. After that you want to do sorting. So comparator and comparable are required to when you will be needed to compare two objects. Okay, so comparable, both are interfaces. Okay, so any class which are supposed to be which are supposed to take part in sorting, okay, where two objects of that class need to compare, then you need to implement comparable or comparator. Okay, so when you are implementing comparable interface, then you have to override compare to, which takes one parameter. So the first parameter to compare is the object itself, that is the this. Okay, and second object is the object in parameter that is used to compare this operator, this object, and one object which is passed in the parameter. Okay, so here one object is the this object which is in parameter, and the object is the current instance of the class, that is the this. Okay, so and compare is used when you are trying to do the comparison outside of the class. So your class not necessarily implementing the comparable. So even though you can do the sorting of the object of those classes. Okay, so at the time you need to use the comparator. So comparator is used when you are trying to provide the two object of the same class type. Class type should be same, and for that class you will have two objects. Okay, so that's how comparable and comparator works. So let's try to see the things in Eclipse. So I have created one class called test comparable. So before going to that, let's try to see some existing class which already implementing comparable. So string is the class which is implementing string comparable, and that comparable can take the object of type string. It means that we can compare string with another string. We cannot compare with string with another type of object. Okay, that's reason you will you will implement something like in the generic way comparable, and you will pass the type of that object which you want to compare. So the method, what it has, this interface. Okay, so this comparator has the method, only one method, that is compare to. So here if you see, it is taking the object as a parameter. The type of that object is t. So t is something which is available at the class level. Okay, so this is the type of the object which I want to use as a comparable. So if you see here, in the case of a string, it is passing as a type of the comparable object is string. So it means that one string can be compared with another string. Similarly you can see in the integer class as well. So here also it is implementing comparable, okay, of type integer, and it has compare to method also, so which is taking another integer and doing the comparison and returning some value. Okay, so in case of string, if I go to compare to method, it is based on the value of a string, it will compare it. So this is the logic which string has written to compare the things. Okay, so this is about comparable. So comparator is, if we talk about comparator, let's open comparator interface. So comparator interface is again like comparable. The only difference is that it takes two parameter to compare. Here compare method, it takes two parameter of type t. So t is something, it is available at the generic level, at the class level. Okay, so if I am implementing comparable comparator, I have to pass the type of the object which I need to use in the comparable. Okay, let's see some example. So let's say I have created test comparable. I will close others. So here let's say I have one string str is equal to say shiv, and another string str2 is equal to max. Okay, let's try to compare. Sys out str dot compare to with another string, that is str2. Okay, here str1 is more than str2, means it is alphabetically, it comes after shiv, comes after max. So the result will come the difference between shiv and max. Okay, so if I put str2 dot compare to str1, it will come in negative. So there is no str1, it is str. So if I compare with str2 with str, let's put variable name as str1. So if I compare str2 with str1, I will get negative value. If both are same, I should be getting 0. Okay, so this is the result of your comparable. This is the result of the implementing comparable interface and defining the compare to logic. So compare to logic is that depends how you want to do the comparison. Okay, so if I talk about custom object which I have created as a employee, so let's create employee e1 is equal to new employee. Okay, here I am passing the ID and its name, and the employee ID 2 say max, and if I want to compare E1 with E2. So there is no method called compare to in employee class. So let's try to implement comparable. The type of comparable object is employee. I want to compare with one employee with another employee. Okay, let's implement unimplemented method because I have implemented comparable. So I need to override compare to method. So I will say return current employee dot id minus o dot id. Okay, it means that I am comparing two employees based on their id. So first id is 1 second id is 2. Second employee id is 2. So if one id of employee 1 is less than id of employee 2, so if I compare it, I should get the value in negative. Okay, so this is what you will get, the negative value. So it all depends how you are writing compared to logic. Okay, so let's try to do one thing. Let's try to remove this comparable. I want to show how comparator works. So when I say comparable, it is basically implementing overriding compared to method and doing the comparison. There is a scenario where someone says that don't change the existing object and still try to do the sorting. Okay, so what we will do, we will create one custom class, that is, I will create one comparator. So I will say class employee comparator. Okay, it implements comparator of employee. Okay, so this is one class I have created here. So I have to override this compare to. So if I compare method here, I have used comparator, so I have to the method which I need to override, that is compare, which takes 2 parameter. So here I will say o1 dot get id minus o2 dot get id. Okay, so instead of giving o1, let's give better parameter name, it's e2, and then say that e1 dot get id minus e2 dot get id. Okay, so now what I will do, I will say that new employee comparator dot compare and passing e1 and e2. Okay, so this way also I can sort it. So I will get the value as -1. Sorry, this way I can compare it. So this comparison is needed when I go for sorting. Okay, so that's all about comparable and comparator. Remember that comparable is used when you are defining a class. At the time you can implement comparable, but when you are doing outside of that class, you can create one comparator, and that comparator will implement the comparator interface. So the difference is in terms of method parameters. So comparable has the method which is that is compared to, and compare to takes one parameter. The second parameter to compare is the current object itself. In case of comparator, the method that you need to override, that is name of that method is compare, which takes 2 parameters, and that you can do independent logic of comparison. Okay, and here the way you have called, that is independent calling of the comparator, so it does not depend the definition of the employee. Okay, so employee class definition is as it is. You are writing a separate comparator using 2 objects of employee. Okay, so in the next video I will talk about collections.